Hello, everyone. Welcome to the book launch of The King of Bangkok. Here's our copy right here. Very beautiful. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for a few more people to join before we get things started. As always, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box, and we'll hopefully get to them during the book launch. Okay, welcome everyone. We'll get started. So welcome if you're just joining us to the book launch for The King of Bangkok right here. It's the newest book in our ethnographic series. So thank you very much for joining us today. So my name is Brianna Muir, and I am an Associate Marketing Manager at the University of Toronto Press. And to get things started, I would like to introduce today's moderators. So we have Elise Waterston joining us, and Charlotte Corden, the author-illustrator group of Light and Dark Times. So thank you for joining us today. So before we get started, we would just like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto Press operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still a home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So before I pass it over to Elise and Charlotte, I would just like to introduce them. So Elise is the Presidential Scholar and Professor of Anthropology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York. And Charlotte Corden is an illustrator and fine artist based in the UK. So welcome Elise and Charlotte, and I will turn things over to you to get started. Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Brianna. And thank you so much for having us here today to talk about this wonderful, beautiful, I'm so lucky I got a copy, book, The King of Bangkok. And congratulations to Claudio and to Sarah and to Chiara. So before we get started, I just wanted to say that, we know that in anthropology, and I'm going to assume that many in the audience here today are anthropologists, although there may not be, it may be other people from other disciplines and have other interests who are here today. So for those who are anthropologists and those who are not, I just want to say that in anthropology, for decades, there have been discussions about and debates centered on the politics of representation, on writing culture, on calls to decolonize the discipline, on how to bring anthropological knowledge into the public conversation on critical issues around the world, and how to put knowledge to good use in the interest of a more just and ethical world. Anthropology is also the discipline that makes the familiar strange and the strange familiar. And hopefully, having learned from our past mistakes in the discipline, how to do that without exoticizing our interlocutors, the people with whom we work in the field. So an overarching goal of anthropology, I think, is that we seek to capture stories of individuals and groups and situate those stories and their experiences and perspectives in larger political, economic, cultural, and social contexts and histories. This is all very challenging. So we're here today to hear from Claudia, Sarah, and Chiara about their book, because they have brought these critical issues to life in The King of Bangkok. So again, congratulations on the publication of your beautiful book. Look forward to hearing all about it, who you are and how you made the book, and what the content is, what the stories are, and also about the beautiful art. And so now I will turn it over to Charlotte, who will start the conversation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks, Brianna, for the introduction. Thanks, Elise, for that kind of overview of where this book sits in relation to us all. And I'm just so happy to be here with you today. I love your book. I think it's amazing. Your illustrations are so detailed. They're so exact. You can tell that you've been there to these places, that you spent time just saturating yourself in the culture, because when you read it, you are just in it. You are in that world with Nock, and it caught me emotionally all the way through. I was with him, and so it really is a brilliant piece of work. And yeah, congratulations again. So before we dive right into the story of the King of Bangkok, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you three came together to do this, and possibly a little bit of information about your trip to in the field? Yeah, in Thailand. I wanted to get that right.
All right, I'll start on this. So first of all, thank you very much to both Alice and Charlotte and the whole team of Toronto University Press for being here and believing in this book. So I'm Claudia Suprensity. I am an anthropologist of Thailand. I've been doing research there for the last 15 years at this point, even if unfortunately due to COVID, it's been a while since I've been back. And I mean, part of, I guess, connecting and starting from what Alice was saying, like part of the origin of this book and our collaboration was really out of a sort of frustration with the limit in traditional anthropological writing and ethnographic writing, with what we could do, or better, what we couldn't do to stories, and the way in which we're kind of cutting and analytically, I would say, sometimes butchering the stories that we were dealing with. And so this was very much something that started on my side from trying to think, what can we learn from people who are expert in other languages about ways of telling stories that are able both to create a theoretical and conceptual engagement, and on the other level, to build this affective connection that both of you were referring to. So I guess that's where, for me, was the starting of this project, and that's where I think our collaboration started to develop. So I'll leave the word to the next one. Yeah, Chiara.
So now it's me. So I'm Chiara, and thanks again for having us. It's very exciting to be here. And nothing. So I'm here because I'm Claudio's friend. I've known him for a very long time. We grew up in the same town in Italy. And in 2012, we ended up living in England. I was living in London and he was living in Oxford, and we were having a night out when Claudio shared with me his idea of turning his PhD thesis into a more commercial work. And he told me, shall I write a novel, or what do you suggest me I write? And I actually told him, why don't you turn your thesis into a graphic novel? At the time, I was working in publishing, and I had realized that there was like a rising interest in graphic novels. So I said it would be ideal, because in one product, you can show both your stories and you can tell us a bit more of the country, which for me at the time was very colorful and exotic. I had never been in Thailand before, so I had this like very banal idea of the country. And also he told me, I want my character to be blind. So I thought it would be just crazy to have a graphic novel based on a blind character. It's a contradiction in terms, so it will work. I'm sure it will work. And the moment I said that, he said, okay, so what do we do next with our project? So his project immediately became our project. And we started to look for a cartoon artist. And through a mutual friend, after several conversations with people working in art, we met Sarah. We flew to Milan, and now I'm passing the ball to Sarah.
Hi everyone, really glad to be here. Thanks for your word. Well, I really didn't know nothing about Thailand, just the basic fact, like, you know, a basic search of Google, a touristic paradise, heavenly nature, house music party and drugs. This was my background at the time. And then Claudio and Chiara asked me to start to work on some characters and some atmosphere, and I started to study. That's it. This is the beginning of our story. And then 6 months later, I threw away all my work because we had a residency in Thailand. And for the first time, I experienced the place. And then the real war started, I think.
Wow, that's really wonderful. Love hearing these stories about how people have come together, because there is so much serendipity to it. That's what happened with Charlotte and me when we came together. But then there's also, everything is always situated in some kind of a context. So there's no, in some ways there are no accidents, but then there are. So it's really a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. So maybe now it'd be great to share with us, you know, a bit about the narrative, the story, and walk us through the King of Bangkok. And also, you know, along the way, telling the story, but also what are some of the key larger themes or issues that you want to convey in this work?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's no point, I think, here to try to reproduce the plot, both because if you're interested, just pick up the book. And secondly, because I think it would take all of the time that we have here. So that makes not much sense. But I think maybe I'll go more in the direction of the second question that you asked, Alice. And I think maybe as a way to like connect it to where Sarah dropped it. So the next step from there was saying, let's go to Thailand together. And my challenge in a way as the person who knew the environment was to try to educate in some ways Sarah's eyes to that environment. And at the same time, her challenge was to educate me on the language of comics. And educate me on one thing mostly, which is reducing my verbosity, which is great both in person and in writing. So from there, we kind of had to do this process of reduction of what were the themes or the basic concept that we wanted to deal with in the stories. So the first thing was kind of what Chiara already mentioned. We had a character, like the idea behind the story started from a person. And because of the lèse majesty law in Thailand, that it makes it very dangerous to express opinion against the monarchy, we decided to take multiple people and multiple characters and compose them into one character. So behind Knock, this blind lottery ticket that it's at the center of the story, there's multiple characters, but one of them is someone that was in fact blind. And I won't tell you how he became blind because that's kind of the big part of the story. But as I was talking to him, part of the issue was that his story never fit into my academic writing. It was just this incredible story of a guy that was talking about this relationship between becoming blind and develop another kind of sight, a sight about contemporary politics, a sight about the situation of Thailand. So one of the big themes for us is like, how do we talk about this process of blindness or blinding on one side and awakening on the other, and this kind of political sight that were developed all of it this year. So that was one of the elements. The second big element for us is that we wanted to behind our book, there was a sense of urgency, which was historically situated, Alice was saying, and had to do with the fact that most of my research happened during a period of massive political mobilization and very successful, apparently, political mobilization. And then in 2014, military coup took over the power again in Thailand. And so a lot of the stories that I had collected that we wanted to narrate were systematically being erased through a process that Scholar of Thailand has called unforgetting, which is both a process of forgetting, but also of this memory remaining there always as an unspoken. So it's not complete forgetting, but it's like it's an unspoken memory that is present and absent at the same time. And what we wanted to do with the graphic novel was really to recover those memories, to make them available, to make them present to readers. And so in many ways, what our story was about is this relationship between the big history, the history you read in the newspaper, the history you read in history book, and some sort of everyday mundane history that we were engaging with by, telling the story of a migrant who moved from the countryside in the 80s and kind of lives through this historical change, sometime indifferent to them, sometime at the center of it, sometime being pushed by them. And so in many ways, this was also for me as an anthropologist, a way to take what my larger kind of project is of reconciling kind of political economic analysis with phenomenological analysis and doing that through graphic means. So to not simply think about the graphic form as a redistribution, but a way of thinking theoretically about reality, which I think was the lesson that Sarah really pushed to both me and Chiara, to think about comics as a way of thinking and not just a way of representing. So I think these are the main themes that we have.
Thanks, Claudio. That's great. I have a follow-up question on that. So it's fascinating to me to learn about your process of educating one another, like in Sarah, all of the everything that you saw in fieldwork, but also kind of sharing this conversation about how to think in comic form. And I was wondering, can you tell me a little bit more about how you decided together exactly what to draw? Because that process of communicating with words what you think should be drawn, it's sometimes so difficult and you get it wrong all the time. So how did you guys make a way to communicate between the three of you about what exactly goes on each page?
Well, it wasn't easy because we took, I think, a year to set the first chapter. So we needed to find a way, a method with strictly rules. In ethnographic research, description are a biggest part of the, of the work. But as you know, when you are a visual person, when you are a drawer, you can relate with things, with images, with sensation, atmosphere. So I think the biggest problem was to try to communicate with Chiara and Claudio what I was thinking. How can I resolve a particular situation or scene? In fact, there's a splash page we can show for talk about the process, the splash page about the city, and this particular page, it's really meaningful for me because for the first time we find a way to take the anthropological and social information. This is Bangkok in the 80s. The city was growing. There was the economic boom. People for the country went to the city for, make a fortune. And our main character were growing too because that from teenager to adult, sorry. And we needed to show that, but Claudio proposed a very narrative and didascalic point of view, and I tried to mashed together all my references, all the iconographic material, and also this dynamic adventure for the two guys in this plate. So we have two young guys playing with the city, but the city is growing all around them. So this is, I think this is, maybe Claudio, you can add something. I think this is our first big point of, you know, we meet in the process, we meet in the heart. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, what you see here in some ways, it was precisely this question of, I mean, I was obsessed, and many anthropologists are, with realism, right? Like, part of what we do is to like be as careful as we can in detail to create a portrait of reality. And I think what both Sarah and Chiara, as people, one expert in graphic form, the other one is narrative, were saying is that sometimes by abstracting, you can be more real. And that sometimes by creating a fiction, you can express emotional and affective reality in a more effective way. And I think here you really see these two obsessions coming together, right? You see every building, every detail, every part of this picture is based on this giant historical archive that we created when we're doing fieldwork. So every element of that city you see there, it's something that existed in that city in 1986, where this was located in time. But at the same time, obviously, this kind of lyrical dimension comes in as a way to congregate the two. So I think this gives you a sense of how we play graphically. In terms of text, I think, as Sarah was saying, I mean, it was a process, right? Like, as anthropologists, one thing that we are not very good at doing is dialogues. And here is all dialogues. So part of the work was how do we extract and reduce out. There's something that Sarah gave to me, this book by Scott McCloud, which he talks about amplification through simplification. So this process in which in comics, you have to eliminate detail so that you can focus on specific elements that you can connect effectively. And this was, I think, part of the work that we were doing along the way.
And it's also so powerful, this image, because you have this city growing up with this borrowed money that's, you know, and how stable is it? I'm not sure how stable this is. We're not quite sure, are we? And then there's the human who has a big place in it, a large presence, and yet going back to your themes of erasure, forgetting, a purposeful, elimination of histories and stories is this profoundly moving image of the human amid this place in this situation. So it really is a very powerful image. Thank you for that.
I also wanted to say that this was the very first big fight between the two of them, the first one of many. In 4 years, can you imagine how many fights they had? We had, because working as a group, we had a lot of discussions and really, really fights. But in the end,
I mean, what we learned is that you always have to collaborate in an odd number so that you have like someone that breaks the stalemate. I don't know how you did it, Alice and Charlotte, just in two.
Well, that's so funny because when Chiara said that, I was thinking, oh, so you were the mediator, huh? You know?
Yeah, sometimes, yes.
You know,
yes, I was.
Really
this is
great.
how they called me.
Yeah. Well, with Charlotte and I, we just duked it out. You know, we just between us.
But I think it was the method. We had a different method. We had Claudio is the verbal paradigm. I'm the visual paradigm. So we fight each other because in comic language, we had both, but you need to understand the grammatic, the syntax, and comics are a powerful medium for dissemination because it belongs to a mass culture, but it maintains its own code. And this code is based in visual and in simultaneously in verbal logic. And you can represent objective places, things, characters, but also you can touch, I mean, the ensemble of the shadow of the culture, or the inner subjectivity of a reader with this lyric representation. So we needed to find a method, we needed to find a point of view together. That's it.
Do you have anything you can share with us on the making of the book? So kind of rough sketches and things, and just share with us a bit behind the scenes of how it all worked visually.
Yeah, I think Claudio can help me and Chiara can help me to go through the making of a page based on the script. And we can talk about, because initially when Claudio, when we were in the first phase, we were setting up the story. Okay, thank you. Okay, so yes, can you? Okay, this is the script, and this is. Okay, on the left part, Claudio tried to put his long dialogue into pages, so as you can see, and then I tried to bow it into a real structure in the other pages, but I let. Okay, this is the drawing. When we can you please start from the first pages with the script? Thank you. Here Claudio gave me the script, and then I return with a lot of questions like what is the context, what is the intent of these pages, how these pages is related to the previous or the next, what is the environment, what we need to show, what we need to point the attention, basic things. And then we skip to drawing the storyboard, on setting the dialogues, and then I think it was a completely back and forward, a lot of discussion, and the mediation of Chiara, of course. And but the first chapters took a year, but I think the fifth chapter was perfect, and the organization, our team was perfect. So. Maybe Chiara or Claudio wants to add something.
No, I just wanted to add that since I was the first reader of each chapter, I came up with a lot of questions. Not only because I didn't understand the structure or the story, but also because I wanted to be engaged in the story. So my feedback were more related to, okay, I understand this, but can we please be more realistic, or can we please move this detail? Can we please add this detail? Because in that picture that I saw in our archive, that is missing here. So I was really the pickiest reader that they could have. And then we also had to manage long distance relationship, because we were working from 3 different cities. So we were mainly working via Skype. And then after a chapter was about to be finished, we would meet in one of these 3 cities for a week and finish up the chapter and start talking about the following chapter. So this was more or less the very strict system that we created. As Sarah said at the beginning, it was quite long to get it right, but then we managed to run it very smoothly. So the 5th chapter went perfect.
So I think we're, I don't know, Charlotte, if you wanted to ask him some specific questions about the, you know, the art itself.
Yeah, I'd love to. There are so many wonderful things about your drawings, Sarah. They are just beautiful and they are so intricate. I've got so many questions that I want to ask you, but I'll be short. So firstly, I wanted to ask you, the images, they look very accurate for the places that it's all set in. It looks like there is just such a wealth of detail. It really feels as if I'm with you there, in the story. But how did you take a lot of photographs? Did you sketch a lot when you were in the field? How did you get all that visual information into the book? And then secondly, I noticed that the colors are, they're really different for each chapter. Like sometimes they're very warm colors, sometimes they're very cold colors. And I was wondering if there was a decision behind that. How did you kind of create this flow of color throughout the book?
You're on mute, Sarah. You're
Hi.
still on.
Yes, oh, sorry. Okay, let me start with the colors. The colors in this graphic novel are not real or descriptive. The function here is psychological or narrative. And I choose them to lead the reader into a specific emotional response. I mean, in fact, in the 3rd chapter is, for example, is set in an island named Kopangan in the 90s. And that period, tourism was growing, and also exploitation of the labor by constructor it was massive. And we needed to represent recreational drugs, but also the methamphetamine that the constructor gave to the workers to, you know, work harder. And so I choose the lysergic and cold in natural color in contrast with the natural paradise of the island. And also the colors helped me a lot. It was crucial to try to explain to the reader how a blind man perceives space and noise. So when I had the idea to took off completely the color and starting to play with these colorful shapes, sharpened shapes, to describe, you know, the space between things, the noise, the kind of sound in the city. I think it was a revelation. I mean, because I wasn't aware, maybe only in the 3rd chapter, I noticed that the same shapes, sharpened shapes, colorful shapes, was part of I built the city with these shapes. So I found in an unconscious way, I found in an unconscious way a visual trigger, a visual hook throughout the story. So and yes, we had a massive photographic archive and video, but I also used a lot Google Maps, because there is this feature that if you look for a street, you can choose the year. And I needed to see many places like Rachapra song before the protest, because after the protest, these places were rebuilt. So I needed to find how shining buildings, but in the 90s and not after. So that's it.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Who knew that about Google Maps? I had no idea they had that filter on it. I'm going to go explore now.
Really useful. Really useful. Yeah.
And how far back does that go?
Depends.
It depends. In Ratchapra song, only in Bangkok, only 12 years.
But still pretty far back, further than I would have thought.
But just to give you a sense, I mean, the way we organized the archive, which was, I mean, you asked at the beginning about our time in Thailand. I mean, during that time, we did a few things. One is doing location scouting, the same way you would do with a movie. And so Sarah was like drawing location after location after location. So there was that aspect, and then the second aspect was really dealing with the construction of a visual archive. So what we end up doing, I mean, I had done a lot of archival work for my work, but on top of it, we basically create this giant Google Drive of divided by year from 1982, when is the first time Nok arrives in Bangkok, to the present. And for each year, we had just all sorts of stuff like picture of the country, advertisement, movie posters, shoes, drawing, clothes. And so that basically whenever Sarah had to draw, she could say, okay, this is 1986. Let me open the 1986 folder and find all of these things about accuracy. And then I think maybe if Chiara wants to talk about this a bit, we also did during the fieldwork a little bit about blindness and how to like think through this question of blindness.
Yeah, we did a very nice experiment because since our protagonist is blind, as we already said, we wanted to experience a blindness ourselves. So the book is divided into 5 chapters, and each chapter, in one part of each chapter, there is a part of Bangkok. So we started from the first chapter, ended up into the 5th chapter, and Claudio and Sarah were working blindfolded. And I was walking with them, hand in hand with them, and we were writing down all sorts of difficulties, noises, perceptions that they could experience while walking blindfolded through the cities, and trying to put all these proofs and evidences into the story. And that was quite a strong experience. Some of us cried at the end because it was very unusual. And we really, really experienced a lot of troubles. We went on a boat, jumped off of it, so it was quite intense.
Yeah,
but
and
very useful for the narrative. Sorry.
No, that's.
I'm done.
But I think this was also important to put next to the interview that we were doing with these main characters about his perception, right? Like we're dealing with a character that becomes blind, that is not born blind, and that's a completely different perception of reality. And so the question about the color that you see also in the screen was really also both out of our experiences of working around, but also about talking with him and reading books that talks about how space is perceived by someone who is in that condition, and the role that this kind of synesthesia between sound and color play. So for instance, at some point in the graphic novel, it starts raining. And we ended up to do that chapter with raining, because one of the things that we read when we were reading about this is this experience in which when the rain starts pouring, every object makes a sound. So suddenly for someone who has become blind later in life, they start seeing objects again. And so part of what we wanted to narrate was that experience of being in a city that is extremely chaotic, extremely loud, extremely sensorial in many ways, and what that means for someone that is living through this experience.
That's really very profound. So I'm wondering, two things. One is back to the artwork itself. I know that Charlotte and I had these discussions along the way, but how did you decide, which pages would have text and which ones would have no text? That's one. And then another question has to do with you sort of, and again, sort of dipping into what Charlotte and I experienced, the very dark aspects of the story, which has to do primarily, the way those larger, powerful forces affect human lives, and the losses and the suffering that results. So those are two very separate questions, but one is about text and image and those choices. But the other has to do with, were there some parts that were particularly difficult and painful, and perhaps others that were, more joyful to work on together or separately?
I mean, I'm a visual person, so I think we choose to let the images speak when we needed to represent emotional part, something only that gesture and atmosphere. Sometimes gesture and atmosphere are the only way to represent something or to engage the feeling of the reader. Because sometimes word there are the risks that is a trivialization, I think. So this is my point of view. We try to choose the scene that we needed to emotionally hook the reader. We needed to how can I say? Oh, please, guys, help me. This is a very big question for me. I mean, I really didn't know how can we choose. It's simpler. I think we needed to choose this way. I don't know how I can explain. Sorry.
I mean, maybe if I can jump in a little bit. I think to me, like the other aspect which connects to what both Sarah was saying, but also like the learning process that we started of like this idea of learning from each other, was that to me, comics did a couple of things for ethnography for me that were really central in thinking about the question of text or not text. And one thing in particular was thinking about temporality and rhythms in very different ways. One of the things that both Sarah and Chiara were telling when I was trying to write the text was that sometimes a page without text can be a very slow page, and sometimes can be a very fast page. Sometimes if you put a lot of dialogue in a page, people will like read very quickly to go over the page and end up focusing less on the images. Or some other time you can slow down time and make it last longer by not putting words, but by putting a lot of different images. So for instance, I wanted to show one page, if I can find it. Yeah, this one. I'll share the screen for a second. So this is another of like the Sarah's pages. And here is like, we're telling the story kind of at the moment in which Nok is on the island and its life is kind of falling apart as the economic crisis arrived in Thailand in the 90s. And his father was a very central figure, dies while he's kind of away working and being exploited and getting into drugs in this island. So here it's like a long period of him coming to terms with the death of his father. And obviously for many, think about in everyday life, often we say when somebody we love died, like there's no words, like I don't know what to say. And part of what Sarah was saying here is that by taking away words and producing a lot of images that feel like the same, but they give you a sense of the passage of time, you might end up spending a lot of time on this page, a lot more than you would have if it was full of text. So thinking about text and image in a way was a way to think about rhythm, on a sense. I think this was a very central way of doing it. Another thing for me was a decision that we made early on that I think Chiara was very adamant on, in saying, let's not have these long pages of explanation. A lot of non-fictional graphic novels have block pages in which you have just a bunch of text that explain some concept. And we really wanted to not do that, to try to allow the visual and the dialogue to speak. So I think that was also another decision. And maybe Chiara, I don't know if you want to add something on this image and text discussion.
No, I think that you explained it very well. And there's also the other page, the other splash page where of Kopangan, where there's the party, and that goes more or less the same thing. We didn't want, we didn't always want to be too narrative, too didascalic. So we describe the craziest, one of the craziest party in the world, the full moon party in Kopangan, with a completely silent splash page, with like only very like almost transparent images of people dancing on the beach, because this is where it's a crucial part of the chapter, where happiness is here, but you turn page and happiness is gone. So it was not very natural as a process of deciding, but after a while, we also trusted Sarah's vision on it. So we, yes, we worked as a team.
You know, Chiara, I know that this English version launching today, and by the way, for the audience to know, I understand that today you received a wonderful review in the Asia Review of Books. So congratulations on that. But, you know, so these earlier versions are in other languages. Can you talk about that? And to share with us, you know, those earlier versions, and maybe also, maybe we can segue into sort of the afterlife of your book, because it already has had an afterlife. Now we'll see what the English afterlife will be, but your book has already had, because it was in other languages, an afterlife. So about that process of translation and all of the experience of it, and maybe show us the earlier versions, and then let's hear about the afterlife of your book.
So Claudio's research and activity is in English and has always been in English. So we started working with the English language, also because we thought we could be published in an Anglophone country first, because I was, as I said, I was working in publishing in London, so I thought I could pitch the book to some English or American publishers. So we started with the English language, also because it was really easier for Claudio to write in that language. All the interviews he took were in English. Our archive material was labeled in English, so it was very easy. Then, while we were writing the book and we were submitting it to some publishers around the world, we got an offer from an Italian publisher, which is like our publisher in Italy, Ad Editore, our first edition. And so we had to decide, what do we do? Shall we keep writing the novel in English or in Italian? But we decided to continue. It was more consistent to finish it in English. And then we had to translate it into Italian. But that was very weird because we are native speakers, Italian native speakers. So it was like a translation with some English words. We couldn't really get them right. And so it was basically a rewriting of all of the dialogues. Sometimes like the two versions doesn't really match because they're nearly different versions. And in this step, our editor helped us a lot. Ilaria Benini from Ad Editore helped us a lot. But then there was a third language, because we were talking about Thailand. We are talking about Thailand. And just to give you an example, because I think we're running out of time, we had a massive fight on the title. Because we've always referred to the book as The Awakening, which is the literary translation of the Thai Ta Sawang, which means awakening. But it means awakening because it's exactly the opposite of blindness from a physical point of view, but it has also a political meaning because it's like an awakening on the situation. In Italian, the translation of Tasawang didn't really work. Absolutely not, it sounded awful. And in English, it sounded like not exactly precise. So from one language, we had to create another version, which is completely different. Now the book is called The King of Bangkok, also in Italian. It's like exactly the literary translation, but in Thailand is Ta Sawang. So it has the original meaning. So we had these three languages working together.
Can we see the cover?
The Taiwan
Cover of
one.
the earlier versions? Very cool.
Yeah, that's
Also-
the Thai.
Yeah,
Is there, sorry.
and there. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And here's the
Yeah, unfortunately, I
one.
haven't received it yet.
new one. So, Claudio, I think you wanted
Yeah,
to
there was
say
like, there's a
something.
question that someone posted
Yes,
on the,
yes,
on
I
the
was
chat,
about
which
to
I think was very relevant here. So I was just
Okay, great.
jumping on
Yes,
that.
I see. So let me see if I can find it now.
I can read it out if you want.
Yeah, yes, please do.
So it was a question about feedback and reaction from academics at Thai University. So
Great.
maybe the person didn't really know about, or we didn't mention the Thai edition. Like, so just to kind of build on what Chiara was saying, I mean, the book came out in Italian first and then in Thai last year. And obviously, as you can imagine, this was the edition we cared about a lot, also stressed about a lot, because of all sorts of questions about faithful representation, cultural appropriation, discussion about rights to tell stories. So we were very nervous for that copy to come about, not to mention the really complicated discourse about language, like I mean, these were interviews that were done in Thai, translated by me in English, then translated into Italian, then translated back into Thai. So obviously, as you can imagine, there was this weird distance between the original interview and the 3-time translated test that came out of the interview. There was also a whole discussion about dialect and the use of dialect in the Thai version, which is a whole other thing. But to our great happiness, the book did very, very well in Thailand. And I think it did well for a number of reasons. One, because the title, Ta Sawang, the book came out in a moment when a new wave of political protests were emerging in Thailand, and a new wave that very much was trying to rediscover this past of protest that we were talking about at the beginning. So in some ways, the text became part of that conversation. So it did very well. It won a bunch of prizes there. And for us was like this very important feeling or seeing the feedback that we received from there. But there were also like questionable feedbacks, feedback that were questioning our work, which I think were also really interesting, particularly by political activists who took issue with our conclusions. And it was really interesting because what the issue that they were taking were like, why are you not concluding the story on a new phase of protest? Why do you have such an intimistic endpoint to the story? And what was really interesting there was trying to negotiate, when we had conversation with them, this relationship between the ethnographic truth of how the people I work with now interact with political movement, which very often is a position of distance, and the kind of political stories that many of our readers want us to end on this kind of positive note. And so this was an interesting discussion about kind of ethnographic realism and political messaging that was happening in the Thai edition, which I think was interesting.
Well, I have to respond to two ways. One is that's so great and so rich. And one of the things about the limitations of ethnography, and no matter what form it's presented, is it ends at a certain particular historical moment itself. And it's the struggle is ongoing. So, you know, the story hasn't ended with this book. It's still a story to continue that still needs to be told. So I think that's a place where you can come together, you know. Now I forgot the other thing I was going to say, but I love this part of the conversation because it's very, you couldn't have asked for a better afterlife for your book than it to be part and parcel of this kind of conversation. That's really wonderful. So I see that there is another question, and we're going to be running out of time in about 4 minutes. So I'm going to read this from Sue Hyatt. Hi, Sue. She writes, I am a completely non-visual, unartistic person. I don't believe that, Sue. But anyway, but I have discovered that students love doing zines. Do any of you have any idea about incorporating zine making into an ethnographic methods class?
May I? Historically, zine are, I think, the carry political idea, carry social movement. You know, there's the zine is, I think, the first tools to talk about a social issue or contemporary ideas. So maybe I don't understand the question. Sorry. No, sorry.
Oh, she's adding something here. Am I still on mute? No. I guess I should have framed the question as graphic ethnography rather than as a zine. So how might we get students to engage in this kind of?
Yeah, just if I can jump in very quickly on this. I think, we did. So there's this other person, Italian, who's been using graphic novel in his research, Andrea Steid, that we often end up presenting with in Italy. And last time we presented together, one thing he did, which was really interesting, was asking students to write a comic in 10 minutes about where they were 5 years ago and where they are now, and using this kind of graphic representation to start doing ethnography. So in many ways, kind of going to the other question that has been asked, really to question, which I'm really sorry if it came out with the sense that there is a distance between professional work and graphic work. I think that's not at all what we're saying. Like, this is an academic book for me. This is our work. This is what we do. And it's no way secondary to the other type of writing. Our idea is... Sorry?
Can I interrupt you really quickly, because other people may not have seen the question, statement. That statement from Regna Darnell says, I'm troubled by the assumption that a graphic project is separate from professional work. And that is what Claudio is referring to right now. And I agree with you. I think that it is it is not separate. And I think in anthropology, at least, it is becoming more and more and more and more acceptable. But anyway, you keep going.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, it's to think along 3 lines. One, the one of diffusion, sure, which might suggest a separation. The other one is anthropology and comic as a form of theoretical thinking, which is what we were trying to say at the beginning. The third one, which maybe goes to the question that Sue was asking, it's to use graphic form as a method, which I think it's also a way of doing research that you could use in class, just as an idea.
Thank you. I think we've run out of time, although there is another question, which we'll have to take up maybe offline, about the role of fiction in this process, which is a great question, but we don't have time for it. Brianna.
Thank you, Elise. Yes, thank you for everyone who contributed questions, and apologies if we didn't get a chance to go through everything. But thank you again, Claudio, Sarah, and Chiara for joining us today. And thank you to Elise and Charlotte for moderating today's webinar. It was so interesting to hear about the parallels that both author groups experienced through the creative process of The King of Bangkok and Light and Dark Times. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And please pick up your copy of The King of Bangkok and also Light and Dark Times, too. They make wonderful gifts together. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. So thank you, everyone, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations again. It's a beautiful book.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.